Gunther Steiner, did he leave? Or was he pushed? That was the question on all F1 fans' mouths on the news that he was no longer going to be the Haas F1 team principal in the 2024 season. Now, though, we understand more about that context. Gunther has secured the team a $20 million sponsor, no mean feat in a cost cap era where the competition for eyes is as ferocious as ever, and wanted to leverage that to get himself a seat on the board, a seat as a shareholder. Gene Haas was having none of it. And of course, Gunther Steiner decided to leave. He jumped. He was not pushed. Much to the consternation of the F1 fanbase. But fear not, because our Gunther will be back on the grid in 2024 by virtue of German broadcaster RTL. Thank heavens for that, because one thing that F1 lacks for in 2024 is personality. And you can have the debate about Gunther's technical competence and prowess all day and night, but which one of us as fans won't smile when we see him back on the grid this year? Oh, and by the way, silly season has kicked off in earnest. Of course it has. That train is never late. Helmut Marko has outlined the performance metrics under which Checo Perez can expect to have a seat for the 2025 season. Marko claims that the Mexican Minister of Defense has nothing to worry about if he continues into 24 in the same vein as he finished in 23. Your heart goes out to Checo, doesn't it? Way to create a pressure-free environment. No blame culture. And the biggest trigger, of course, in silly season was the Lewis Hamilton seat. Lewis Hamilton joining Scuderia Ferrari in 2025. George Russell has come out and said he spent a lot of time with Toto Wolff and was amazed to see the number of drivers calling Toto Wolff's phone during their meeting. Principal among candidates for that Lewis Hamilton seat in 25, one Alex Albon, Carlos Sainz Jr., and some chap called Fernando El Plan Alonso, who keeps talking. He's put himself very firmly in the shop window only months after talking about his commitment long term to the Aston Martin project. The man from Oviedo, Asturias has cited that he's the only champion currently on the grid who will be out of contract come the end of the year. Oh, the talk around Carlos Sainz that he'll be heading up the Audi project in 2026, if indeed that still happens. Because Audi's chief executive officer, Gernot Dorner, is planning to remove Oliver Hoffmann and place him as head of the Audi F1 project. But this scares me, because when these guys start to reshuffle at this level, the senior stakeholders, sometimes these projects can go away. And an Albon, of course, the rumour is that he has first refusal over that Red Bull second seat by virtue of the fact that the 51% owners of Red Bull are Thai. The Ovidia family, and Christian Horner is super keen to keep those guys on side. Oh, but there is a wild card to that Lewis Hamilton seat, and his name is Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Yes, the 17-year-old who skipped F3 to compete in F2. We'll see him for the first time Thursday at 9 AM in practice. Rest assured, racing fans around the world will be watching keenly, but some of us, mention no names Toto Wolff, will be watching more keenly than others. Legendary F1 personality and former Jordan team boss Eddie Jordan on his Formula for Success podcast has spoken of one Yuki Tsunoda, saying that the only way that he keeps that Visa Cash App RB seat is by virtue of the fact that they need to manage the relationship with Honda. Jordan knows this, he says, because at the time as team principal of Jordan, he wanted to keep one Hans Harold Frentzen, a driver of not insubstantial talents. His engine manufacturer Honda at the time, though, wanted him to take Takuma Sato, a Japanese driver. Eddie, he says, needed to make an $18 million decision. Money talks, some say, and never louder than in the sport of F1. Speaking of which, the Christian Horner saga continues to rumble on, and we think that we'll get a resolution at some point this week. But what's at play here is a power struggle between the 51% owners of Red Bull, the Ovidia family, and Austria, Salzburg, the likes of Oliver Mintzlaff, Mark Mateschitz. And the latest reports are around a disagreement on the selling of the Visa Cash App team. Now, we know that Zach Brown, amongst other TPs, are protesting, saying that it's not fair that Red Bull can operate with two teams in effect in F1, that this is a conflict of interest indeed, that the level playing field isn't level. But the critical point here is that the powers that be at Red Bull aren't steering in the right direction. Horner, on one hand, wants to keep the team formerly known as Toro Rosso as a feeder team, nurturing junior talent. The Ovidia family, on the other hand, the higher-ups at Austria and Salzburg, they see no reason, no economic advantage from keeping the Visa Cash App RB team, especially not from a marketing perspective, because lest we forget, Red Bull are an energy drinks company, and all that they do in F1 motorsport and other is with a view to promote said energy drink. Now, some aficionados are speculating that this saga concludes with a settlement, that ultimately in a couple of weeks this might go away with silence and good behaviour. Others are theorising why this hasn't already gone down legal proceeding routes, and why has it taken so long. None more than Ford, who was starting to ask questions about the opaque, non-transparent nature of these proceedings and calling into question their enduring partnership with Red Bull, due to kick in from 2026. Ford have asked questions of Red Bull and hitherto received no answers. Ford have expressed concerns because they held both themselves and their partners to the highest standards of accountability, diversity and inclusion. Ford CEO writes that he's increasingly frustrated, however, by the lack of resolution or a clear indication about when you anticipate a fair and just resolution of this matter. This is Ford motioning that if these allegations are proven true, their partnership with Red Bull is untenable, not sustainable. In stark contrast to the speculation over the dominant team this season, that does have legs. Now, many people are saying that Red Bull are sandbagging, that at no time during testing did Max Verstappen have any less than 35 kilograms of fuel in his car, and that doesn't bode well for the rest. So dominant do some paddock participants think Max Verstappen's going to be this year? They've suggested that the only solution for a competitive season is to give Max Verstappen sleeping pills. But there were those in the Mercedes camp who were saying that they too were sandbagging and expect a decent showing from Messrs Russell and Hamilton at the Bahrain Grand Prix this weekend. The schedule for which, by the way, has been brought forward by one day in anticipation of Ramadan. Remember, qualifying on the Friday, race day Saturday. And this week, Liberty Media are due to report earnings, an expected $2.4 billion worth of revenue, material growth on last year's number, which was $1.7 billion. But the question for Liberty Media going forward is, how do they continue that growth curve? More races is the obvious answer, but to the protestation of many drivers who already say that 24 on the calendar is too much. And with 6 of the Grand Prix currently on the calendar in their last year of contract, there is talk about Africa, there is talk about India, and most pertinently, there is talk about Chicago. And we know that because Formula One have applied to license and patent the term Chicago Grand Prix. It shouldn't surprise you then that F1 harbours aspirations to expand not just into North America, but similarly, more intensively, into the Middle East. But if you look at the broader trajectory of the way that sport's going, not least boxing and mixed martial arts are combat sports, these guys are getting it done. Some of the biggest fights in history now are getting done on a weekly basis, and this is born of projects like Vision 2030 and Riyadh Season. These guys, these territories are willing to pump money into promoting these events. Now, some will argue that this is just sports washing, but I think it's more meaningful, more broad than that. What's happening now is that these guys are not just affecting the sports landscape, they're disrupting it, irrevocably so. This is a reprofiling of the F1 calendar entire. The only problem with that being this: some employees are being turned away, being denied entry from the Sakhir circuit for having rainbow flags. Yeah, there are questions to be asked. How can you race as one and champion diversity and inclusion and continue to expand into countries with this sort of humanitarian record? The two can't square. And Netflix have overstepped their creative license by using F2 footage in an F1 documentary. You see, for me, Netflix is brilliant if you haven't watched F1. But the second that, as an F1 fan, you try to start correlating, connecting the dots between what you saw and what you're seeing, it falls apart. Case in point is Singapore last year, where Carlos Sainz leveraged his mate Lando Norris, gave him DRS, and that was fundamental to his race victory. No mention of that in Drive to Survive, but they never let truth get in the way of a good story, right? And cost cap regulations have reared their ugly head again, as we know that teams are trying to skirt for the rules by categorising staff working on F1 technologies as part-time. While Toby Gruner reports that F1 plan to change these rules to ensure that even for personnel working only part-time on F1 technologies, that their salaries wholly allocated to the F1 team's budget, closing the cost cap allocation loophole. The cost cap swerve then is no more.